Not only is it my pleasure, it's my honor to share with you Claire Christine Allen Daugherty came into my life over 40 years ago. And most people, when they introduce people, they want to try to impress them as much as they can by sharing their degrees, etc. Well, I'm her degree. And when you see me, you see a full person that has developed itself based on her love and care for me. Together we have 12 children, hers, mine, and ours, together. Over 20 grand, great-grand, more than 22. 28 children. And lately, I didn't even travel out of the country until I met this woman. She had been a world traveler way before she met me. Speaks more than 5 languages. And I thought as we get older, we would slow down, but now we're traveling even more. Because I can't speak the language, I just carry the bags. I said, where do we go now? Where do we go now? And she has increased in her level of divinity and sanctification, and more pure in heart than before. And I want to share this with you, that in her constant growth, in connecting to the invisible source that we call God, it has helped me to understand her value more than I've ever understood any other woman in the world. And from that lens, I can now value all other women based on knowing her value. And I treat them as such, and other people as well. She is my guru. She is also a connection, she has a connection to the angelic world that I've never seen anyone have before. She's also what they would call a person who connects to the spiritual world and help people to find their meaning in life. So she does what they call readings, and she's quite good at it. I'm grateful for it, and she does it with no effort whatsoever. I'm thinking she's got to prepare. She's, I got a reading, I got to go. And right into it, right? It's amazing. She has this wonderful gift. Well, you have a treat today because you can hear her share and deep qualities of information. And I have known this woman, as I said before, more than 40 years, 45. And every time she speaks, I learn something new. So you're in for a treat today. Let us welcome Claire Daugherty.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. And as Levi mentioned, I'm very involved in working with angels. I do a great deal of international travel, giving a very simple seminar, we could call an Angels 101, encouraging people to invite angels into their life. And I thought, well, that's what I'll speak about. But in the past 24 hours, I was shown, no, this time don't talk about the angels. I could talk every week about angels and never run out of things to say. But what I was shown in a series of events and situations is that today's topic, I'm to talk about family. Now, I was introduced by my husband. My daughter-in-law and my grandson were introduced. They originally came here long before I knew of the fellowship. They came here many years ago. In 2016, they emigrated to Germany. And I would say Ruth and I, even though we're not related by blood, we have more in common than I do with some of my daughters that I gave birth to. That our worldview and our passion is actually very similar. They flew into New York and visited our daughter in Connecticut for a few days. Then they took the train down to Washington, where Levi and I drove up to meet them. And Ruth got the inspiration that she wanted to visit my parents' grave. My father is buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and my mother is buried with him. We had a deeply moving sermon maybe a couple months ago about another burial in Arlington. Made a big impact on me. And Ruth wanted to do healing work on my parents in the spirit world, my father in particular, because she's keenly aware of how Matthew is the sum total of all of his ancestors, not just her. Now, I didn't clear this with Ruth, so some things I'll leave for her to talk about, but our legal relationship ended some years ago through my son's choices, but my love for her was unchanged. And my brother made a comment when we were going to pick them up at the train. "Oh, this is really unusual." I said, "Well, what's unusual about it? I still love Ruth exactly the way I always loved her. Nothing has changed. She's still my grandson's mother. Why would I not be thrilled to see her?" Many people who are on the spiritual path often talk about different issues that they're facing in their lives as karma, perhaps from a past life. And I sometimes hear people say, "Well, I'll just have to deal with that in my next life." But I hear very little in people who are spiritually aware and awake and deliberately living a conscious life about their ancestors. And also, by the same token, what will we leave to our descendants? How we are interconnected by an unbroken chain of DNA from all those who went before us and all those who will come after us. And it's interesting, I guess it was Friday, I went to get my hair cut. We were all staying at my sister's house. I went to get my hair cut. Ruth had not yet arrived. She was on the train with Matthew. And I walked next door to Barnes & Noble, and I am a compulsive reader. I'm a biblioholic, and I should have known better than to go into Barnes & Noble. And I went in there, and I picked up a couple of books, and I was reading 2 books at once. I couldn't put them down. And the next thing I knew, 3 hours had passed, and I'd left my phone at my sister's. So I thought, I am in trouble. People could not reach me. My sister had actually come to Barnes & Noble looking for me. It's only about half a mile from their house. And one of the books I picked up, I had heard this woman's story before in a magazine article, but it was a book written by a woman who was born through artificial insemination. She was one of the very early ones. I think she was born in 1962. And her parents never revealed this fact to her. She was greatly cherished, greatly loved, and she was closer to her father than her mother. And when she discovered, quite by accident, that she was not related in any way to her half-sister on her father's side, And she realized that meant she was not in any way related to the man she had loved as her father, and who had been closer to her than her mother, who was in fact her biological mother. And reading this woman's story of her search and her need to look at the man, just meet him for coffee, which he refused to do, to see him, to see his face. And it was a deep, primordial need. And she began to question, well, what does this mean to all these other relatives, this vast clan that I've grown up in? And her father was a very observant Orthodox Jew, and her family had different levels of observance. But she went to meet some of her relatives, and they said, nothing has changed. It doesn't matter to us. And it's as if the puzzle that she had put together was suddenly broken, and she was trying to put it all back together. And then this morning, I just stumbled on an article on the internet. They're little bait articles. They try to get you to see the next 500 advertisements. And they always have, next. And it was about a couple, a childless couple, that adopted embryos from a fertility clinic. That can be done. There are couples that, after they've completed their family, they will allow their frozen embryos to be donated to another couple that can't conceive. And it was a very, very interesting and very touching story. The couple were both white, and they adopted 2 black embryos that turned into 3. One of them became identical twins, so they ended up with 3 children. But this kept coming to me, but I want to go back to Arlington Cemetery. First, I was so moved that Ruth wanted to go and pray over my father's grave. Ruth is an active healer, and she has things that she does to liberate the ancestry. And she was praying over the grave, and Matthew was asking many questions. My father was decorated. He was wounded in North Africa, and on his gravestone it says Purple Heart. And we were explaining to Matthew, the history of Arlington and who can be buried there and what are the requirements, and a little bit of American history. And then my brother and his wife were there. My sister was with us. And before we left, we decided to pray. So we gathered around the grave, and as we began to pray, I was moved to tears because I thought, it's very possible that my father, who's Matthew's great-grandfather, was in a heated battle with one of his other great-grandfathers. My father was fighting the German troops in North Africa, Rommel. And here is this child who is 100% German. He has a German passport, and 100% American. He has an American passport, and he is the embodiment of peace. Many of you don't know this. This is good for another time, but Levi and I actually had an arranged marriage. I think, Peg, you know that, don't you? Oh, you didn't know? Wow. We had an arranged marriage, and it was for spiritual purposes. We were introduced to each other by our spiritual mentor, Reverend Moon, and we were one of those 2,000 couples in Madison Square Garden in 1982. As my grandson would say, fun factoid. But one of the reasons that we were introduced is Reverend Moon said, the shortcut to world peace, one of the shortcuts, is marry your enemy. So if your ancestors have a history of conflict and animosity, become a family, a literal flesh and blood family, and those ancestries are joined together. And of course, everybody loves the child. That's the simple version. Actually, we had to do a lot of cleaning up of our ancestry, and it was a battleground for many decades, I would say. And I sometimes joke that the first 40 years were the hardest, but we did break through. Of course, we were working on it all the time because we both had that vision. We're doing this for posterity. Levi has ancestors that were slaves. I have ancestors. I like to talk about the ones that were Quakers in the Underground Railroad, but some of them also had slaves. So can you imagine? We both carry those memories. We carry that weight with us. And sometimes when we would look at each other, it wasn't Claire and Levi, it was great-grandma, great-grandpa saying, what you did to me, and we had to process all that. So family is the foundation of society. Every society is made up of families. Now, families can come together in many different ways. Levi and I have a blended family, as he said. He had 4 children, and I had 1 child. 2 of his children were already in spirit. They passed as infants. And I was not raising my child. My child had been adopted at birth. And I thought, wow, this is great. I can raise his children. Someone is raising mine, I'll raise his. And I was very happy about it. I thought it was a good arrangement. It seemed like good karma. I didn't understand what would be involved in all the trials and tribulations. You know, the younger you are, the more unexperienced and just idealistic. But I'm still very connected to those children and their grandchildren. This has gone on for generations. And I was explaining to Matthew, I said, well, actually you have 20 cousins. Most of them are much older than you, and you have 28 first cousins once removed. A lot of them are your age. He was looking at this huge photo collage that Levi's oldest daughter made for Father's Day, and I was telling him who all these people were. There are 48 of them, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So 48 is a lot of people. He doesn't know them all, especially he lives on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But he's connected to every single one of them because everyone on that board, all 48 of them, have Levi's DNA, as he does. Some of them he recognized, oh, there's, his first cousins and his aunts and uncles that he saw growing up. But our ancestry is far more important than we begin to imagine. And it's something that's really ignored in our culture. Now, if you have Native American roots, it's not ignored at all. They're very, very conscious of the role that each generation plays, the obligations we have to those who've already crossed, and the obligations we have to those who are not yet born. We are shaping the world that we're going to give to them. Will they thank us? Or will they say, what were they thinking as they're walking around with a mask filtering the air they breathe? How could they have been so blind? But lineage is something that we need to take a second look at. Now, my daughter that was adopted was cherished and loved. I did not have contact with her until she was 21. She's now 52. But it was very important to both of us to get to know each other. Her son and I have an ongoing dialogue because there is a connection there that cannot be denied. It's like I was the missing piece of that puzzle, and she wanted her children to know me. And her mother understood this and was very natural. They hesitated a while to tell her adoptive father she was in touch with me, but when we finally met, which was quite a few years ago, it was a joyful encounter for us. It was, again, finding that missing piece of the puzzle. And I realized this woman who was, as I said, greatly cherished, greatly loved, very close to her father and his whole family, how her world was rocked when she realized he was not her biological father and how she had to reconfigure her whole life. And then she eventually was able to make peace and know that, yeah, she carried all this other ancestry, but still, she was still part of the family that she always knew. And when they had that bombshell of information that none of them knew, it did not in any way change their feeling towards her. So as I stood at my father's grave yesterday and I looked at my 12-year-old grandson, I remember when I was 12 years old and how important my parents were to me and how connected I was to them. And not just my parents, but my grandparents. We saw my grandmother every week, and how much I look forward to meeting them again on the other side, because the connection is still there. They're not physically with me, but we are bound by our DNA and by love. So love is half of the equation, and then the DNA is also a really important part that we tend to just dismiss. But it's far more important than we realize. And as Americans, we have inherited a situation from our ancestors that we are responsible for. We didn't create it. You know, it's not our fault, but we're 100% responsible. And that's true in every country. Matthew was asking me about, you know, the World War, we were looking at some World War I graves, and was asking who was fighting who, and he was realizing, he said, the Germans, we were talking about the barbarians sacking Rome, he said, they were German, weren't they? I said, yeah, and other, Nordics. And then we were talking about World War I, World War II, and he's realizing he's a composite of all of this. That as much as he's American, and when he's in America, he really he wanted to get some American flag flip-flops as soon as he got here. And he loves everybody, he speaks English. But he's also 100% German. So I see in him the hope of the future, that this young man has integrated these different parts. And I said, maybe your other great-grandfather was on the other side of the firing line when your great-grandfather was wounded. But Reverend Moon had this vision that through marrying our enemy, we could advance the process of peace. And I think he really was onto something. And Matthew, to me, is the living proof, as well as many of his cousins. And Levi's 70th birthday, we were having a big barbecue, and lots of those 48 people showed up. There's more than 48 people. That's just the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. There's also all the kids and their spouses. So it's about 60 people in the immediate family, something like that. And my brother was flipping the burgers, and he's looking at all these children running and screaming, and some are black, and some are white, and some look Hispanic and Asian. And he said, my God, they're all Levi's. And they're genetically Levi's. And it's amazing because that's what the world will look like. We won't make lines based on how much money do you earn, what neighborhood do you live in, how deeply pigmented you are, what your bone structure, your eyes. We will recognize the essential humanity of every single living soul. Not what are your abilities? Do you need a wheelchair to move around? Are you unable to vocalize your thoughts? As a medium, I sometimes see that people who have what we would consider severe disabilities, maybe they're unable to speak, unable to take care of their essential bodily needs, some of these people are very highly advanced spirits. Boy, do I see that. I remember doing a reading for a mother who had a child who was completely unable to move on his own. He had some spastic movement, but he did not have control of his body. He never spoke a word. And I asked her, does he just burst out laughing sometimes for no apparent reason? And she said, yes, he does. I said, well, he has a whole group of friends that hang around him, spirit friends, and they're constantly telling him jokes. I said, he actually has a very active social life. And it just lifted her spirit because she, the care of this child was tremendous. And she felt like he's missing out on life completely. But I said, no, he's living his life on another plane. And sometimes I'll have people that will call me for readings, and they do mention having a severely handicapped family member. And some of them are very cognizant that this person is a gift, that this person came as a teacher, and how they've been transformed, even though maybe this person needs 24-hour care. So we can't judge people by what they look like, how they speak, what their language is, how much money is in their pocket. Thank God, because mine are empty. But when we learn to connect to each other, heart to heart, soul to soul, then we really can begin to live in that kingdom that Jesus taught us to pray for. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And when we recognize our own roots, where we came from, and we understand what we're leaving behind, it will help us find our place in that cosmic puzzle. And even if you don't have a good relationship with your siblings, or if your parents are still living, or your children are estranged, work on it. Do your best. Because those patterns will just keep repeating until somebody fixes them. So do the best you can. That's all anybody can do. We can only do our best. Drop out of the blame game. Oh, I'm not speaking to her because blah, blah, blah. Well, he said, he did this, he did that. That's just like sitting with your flat tire saying, I never should have bought my tires there. Well, what are you going to do to get moving? If I bought the other tires, I would have, still be rolling. Don't live in the moment of the difficulty. Seek the solution. So even if the worst hurts come from our family, but that's where sometimes the greatest possibility of healing can come. Because with our family, especially our siblings, we share that same ancestral burden. And also those gifts. So, as I said, I was planning to talk about angels today, but I was shown, no, there's something else. A few months ago, I was planning to talk about the divine feminine, and I got sidetracked again. So this, I feel, the spirit world really wants us to be aware of the role that they still play in our lives, even after they transition. They're still very, very connected. And I really felt that yesterday as I stood at my parents' grave. I thought, wow, I knew them when I was a child, Matthew's age. They were central in my life. They were the center of my orbit. And here I'm standing with Matthew. He never met them. But that's not a big space. It's one generation from me and two to him. And how all of us have affected each other so profoundly. So let's take the gifts that have been given to us, and we all have some, or you wouldn't be sitting in this room. You wouldn't have the consciousness to come here and into this fellowship if a foundation had not been made for you. That I can guarantee. As a medium, I really see that again and again. And yes, we all have baggage, but that's our job. That's what we signed up for, to work it all out, and hopefully we go into the next realm as unencumbered as possible. Thank you very much.